There is a not-so-subtle shift taking place in the art world. It's a growing demand for pieces by artists of color.
In this week's Positively Black, Miles Miller takes us to Christie's, where black art and black art lovers are painting a new picture of the auction market.
When it was up for auction last week at the famed auction house Christie's, 2020, a piece by the Queens-raised artist Marcus Jansen was expected to be sold for $60,000 to $80,000. The proceeds benefiting the Bronx Museum of the Arts. Instead, it sold for $107,100.
Marcus Jansen was born 1968 in Manhattan, New York City, while residing with his family in the southeastern part of the Bronx. His earliest memories are of his close Caribbean, Jamaican, Trinidadian family who arrived in the United States in 1954 to pursue the American dream. Early joys were listening to the Edward Hawkins singers Oh Happy Day, watching superhero cartoons, Sesame Street, Sanford, and Son, and vivid memories of his father watching news, politics, the Vietnam War, and seeing protests and Dr. Martin Luther King on TV. Jansen resided in the city during the time of economic decline and the emergence of a graffiti subculture on trains and walls that permanently changed the city's visual environment around him. In the early years of the 1970s, he's raised in a high-riser apartment on the 12th floor by his grandparents, aunt, and mother, a practicing nurse from Jamaica in the Soundview Park section on Boynton Avenue, later joined by a German-born businessman and historian from Germany who becomes his father. The family moves to Laurelton, Queens, where Jansen starts school. While attending PS 156 at age 6, Jansen was included in a New York City student art competition and exhibited a stunning painting of a male lion on paper at the Lever House in Manhattan. This event introduces Jansen to the world of public art exhibitions. Jansen's father feels the racial tension through the economic and racial power structures in the late 70s and decides to move his family overseas instead. Jansen's family leaves New York City shortly before the explosion of the punk rock and hip-hop art scene and is transplanted from NY to a very opposite economic system, to the city of Mönchengladbach, Germany, his father's birthplace, widely known also as the birthplace of artist Markus Lüpertz and Hitler's propagandist Joseph Goebbels. He is placed in a German-speaking school and immediately faced linguistic challenges and severe racism as the only child of color in the school and town, but excelled in art and sports more than academic subjects. This may have been his first encounter with racial power structures. He travels to Paris, Venice, and the Netherlands for the first time and soaks in European culture and the arts. He returns to his grandparents in the Bronx in 1979 with his family to visit and observe the city's changes for the worse economically. He starts making comparisons to the vast economic differences already in early adolescence and asking questions. Growing up, Jansen experiences challenges with viewers understanding his paradoxical cultural influences, in particular, Germany and New York City, and sought to find other means of bridging social, cultural, and economic class differences in his art, as well as tying them together. Politics, current events, and world history were at the forefront of discussions initiated by his historian father during much of Jansen's upbringing. It was the vibrant German expressionist painters and up-and-coming graffiti artists in New York, and during travel to Paris, Amsterdam, and Brussels, and the New York action painters that left their strongest imprint on Jansen. Attracted by movement, color, and motion, he is still drawn to these impulsive, rebellious avant-garde painters and sees a common thread between the graffiti writers and hailed contemporary masters that he explores in his work, creating a bridge of communication. One day, 14-year-old Jansen encountered a book about Robert Rauschenberg in a Mönchengladbach, Germany, train station, and although he had never heard of the artist, was fascinated by the cover depicting instruments mounted on wood in a golden color. They exuded a strong, urban, inner-city feel that he had not yet encountered. Jansen frequently returned to his native New York during summers, staying with his family in the Bronx, or on the Upper West Side of Manhattan with his godmother, during the important 80s cultural art movement over the summers and returned in 1982. A rebellious graffiti movement dominated the city's youth and served as Jansen's first major artistic influence. He became fascinated with how art was altering the urban landscape he had left and admired those that led the way. Jansen meets Manhattan-based graffiti writer West Rubenstein, aka Westone, who had made his mark as noted in the book Graffiti Kings by Jack Stewart, and is introduced to the artist by Jansen's godmother, who lived on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. West inspired Jansen to paint, and Jansen cites their meeting as his first major art inspiration. Gravitating toward the instinctive impulse versus what Jansen sees as regimented academics, he completed high school and, at the request of his father, attended the Berufsfachschule in Mönchengladbach for 1 year, where he studied graphic art, Gestalten. Exposure to photography, design, technical drawing, painting, and color gave Jansen an understanding of the basic structure of the arts. He became bored and left. But in European tradition like Willem de Kooning, Jansen began an apprenticeship as a commercial house painter, where he was introduced to oil enamel paints that remain his medium of choice. Jansen completed his training and spent time between Maastricht, Netherlands, and Germany. In 1987, he became friends with the Dutch Afro-Caribbean performer Daisy D, former host of the German Viva TV station Club Rotation. In 1987, at the iconic nightclub, the Soul Center in Mönchengladbach, Germany, a stomping ground for American GI, and hip-hop emergence, she became Jansen's biggest supporter and started to give him graffiti commissions. Traveling throughout Europe, he was exposed to more art and culture, visiting cities like Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, and Switzerland. Not being able to make a living with art, Jansen enlisted in the U.S. Armed Forces in 1989 and completes basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, and was immediately deployed to Operation Desert Storm in August 1990. He returned in April 1991 and was stationed, among many other areas, in Dragon City, Dhahran, close to a devastating missile attack. On February 25, 1991, he witnessed the explosion from his guard duty tower and was flown by helicopter to the frontline battlefield toward the end of his tour, where he saw the devastation left by Allied forces. Returning from that tour, Jansen had more questions than answers. He was deployed to the demilitarized zone in Korea for a year, and after returning, where he was introduced to the first time seeing an aerial drone, he underwent art therapy treatment at Walter Reed Hospital in Maryland, where he was stationed for 3 years.
Passion as a job is really what we all want.
Getting recognized for that passion and how it shaped our community is a dream. I sat down with an internationally recognized artist from Southwest Florida doing just that.
That's the singular sound of work in Marcus Jansen's studio as he steps onto scaffolding just to reach the canvas. His paintings are often big, but their message is even larger.
My works are generally more socio-politically charged, so I respond to the things around me, whether they're politically, social, or human concerns.
His artwork got the counselor's attention during art therapy classes for PTSD, inspiring Jansen to think about painting again, and was spiritually influenced by his well-known uncle, Dr. Samuel George Hines, who was a mentor and pastor in the Washington, D.C. community and preached at the Church of God, heavily involved in the reconciliation of urban communities. Jansen is stationed in Germany for his last duty assignment with the 1st Infantry Division in Vilseck, Bavaria, where his first artworks begin to surface in the barracks he stays in. He discharged and moved in with then-girlfriend Michaela Hansen, an economics major from RWTH Aachen University, originally from Greifswald, in former East Germany, who grew up behind the Berlin Wall, who was influential and underlined the artist's economic opinions, and began painting war-torn and disenfranchised urban sceneries that are inspired by highlighting the artistic character, as well as the economic differences coming from them in the U.S., reflecting on his roots. Jansen is becoming more critical of U.S. interventions and attitudes regarding foreign policies, and undeclared military interventions. He was discharged honorably with the rank of sergeant. His own art career began in the U.S. Army barracks in Vilseck, Germany, painting secretly while living in the army barracks until discharged, and opening a studio in Aachen the same year, arranging a debut exhibition at Aula, Carolina. For the first time since his discharge, the exhibition is noted by the Aachener Zeitung. Jansen approached Dr. Annette Lagler, director at the Ludwig Forum for International Art, for guidance, while living only blocks away from the museum. He shared photos of work from 1997, and she gave helpful advice to the young artist. Jansen's longtime friend Daisy D., originally from the Dutch island of Curaçao, commissioned Jansen for 2 works that were later sold to LL Cool J. Difficulties finding gallery representation in Germany. He decided to leave Aachen and return to his roots in New York City to test his work under the name MEPS Millennium, and signed his work MEPS with a larger international audience. While having difficulty holding other jobs, he wins Host First Art competition called ORB, E-Sport by Def Jam producer Russell Simmons, and shows at the Copacabana nightclub in Manhattan, where he is approached and complimented by one of his idols, Crazy Legs, from Rock Steady Crew. Jansen set up on the street corner of Prince Street and Broadway with artist friend Carlos Ramsey to sell their works in 1999, and became part of the early group of artists referred to as Prince Street Kings, who displayed their art in Soho. He commutes from the North Bronx and the Upper West Side in Manhattan to Long Island on weekends, to bartender so he can sell work during the week downtown. It is then that one of his first buyers, Hollywood actor John Ortiz, purchased Harlem Deli, 30 by 40 inches, while filming a movie with Julian Schnabel in Manhattan. He also sold his highest-priced street painting to date for $750, City Stroll, to now New York art dealer Monia Rowe. He remains on the same street corner for several months before realizing the power of the internet. The same year, Jansen's best friend Robert Suarez, Rico, and co-founder of his first studio, dies suddenly while serving in the military. Jansen finds out late and starts a new direction in painting, and had his first gallery showing in New York at Strykoff Fine Art in Chelsea after being invited by owner Jeff Strykoff, who saw his work in a magazine. In 2003, Jansen's first son is born, and Jansen received his biggest commission from the Ford Motor Company and shows at the Dearborn Charles H. Wright Museum for a display of the Ford Motor Company paintings, Michigan in Detroit, where his first catalog is handed over to filmmaker Spike Lee. This becomes Jansen's first museum affiliation. Considering family life first, Jansen left the street corners thinking he could be more effective online in an early internet era, and moved to Atlanta in August 2001 with his then wife. A month later, the September 11 attack took place in New York, where many of his Prince Street Kings friends witnessed the event and left the city. The attacks on September 11th inspired a visual investigation into 21st century political, racial, and economic environments, and meeting Richard Beavers at Sbarro on Times Square in New York City, where both first meet in person. Urban art enthusiast and cultural game changer in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, Richard Beavers saw Jansen's work in an ad in The Source magazine. An MTV employee at the time, whom Jansen encouraged to open an art gallery, Beavers became Jansen's first New York collector, and later his art dealer, and appeared in Jansen's first film. Beavers started selling Jansen's work nationally, and focused on elevating his Brooklyn community, placing works with NBA New York Knicks All-Star, Carmelo Anthony and Jimmy Butler, as well as noted collector Peggy Cooper Cafritz from his gallery on Marcus Garvey Boulevard. Jansen starts exploring global topics and the human condition in the post-9/11 era in his work, drawing upon his own worldly experiences and parallels between historic and contemporary world politics and unbalanced economics, using the urban landscape as the stage. He moves to Florida with his family, where he continued working, initially unknowingly not far from where the 20th century master Robert Rauschenberg, who resides on Captiva Island. He explores economics in urban communities through landscapes. 2004, Jansen incorporates stencils informed by his street art roots. In addition to often collages in his work, at a time when many artists of color in America were focusing on Black identity images, his work explores power structures via politics, surveillance, and economics, through mostly forgotten urban environments inspired by his native Bronx in the 70th instead, and is inspired by traditional elements of African American art making and compositions such as by Robert Rauschenberg and Romare Bearden collage techniques, but adds immediately recognizable abstract expressionist brushwork with overlapping elements and socio-political commentary in his work. And found objects. The nearly monochromatic scene in Empty Plates, 2007, parallels photographs by Robert Farber with its use of gradient color, while details found in the corner of the painting pay homage to abstract expressionists like Willem de Kooning, another of Jansen's inspirations. Jansen employs a central line to divide the composition, a technique also seen in John Stewart Curry's Fire Diver. By including Jansen's artistic influences and contemporaries, this exhibition highlights the visual, technical, and thematic correlations among them. Jansen had the opportunity to show and meet with his much-admired artist, Robert Rauschenberg, in support of a local Arts for Act charity at the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery in 2004, almost immediately after arriving in Florida, and was introduced to him personally by Grammy-winning musician Kat Eppel. After Rauschenberg viewed Jansen's painting and complimented his work at a group show at the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery, while also meeting Rauschenberg's art production director Lawrence Wojtek, who he later works with. He also meets father of digital art, Lawrence Gartell, who mentors Jansen for his first catalog. The same year, Jansen meets art historian and curator Jerome A. Donson, the former director of the famous American Vanguard exhibitions 1961 that traveled to Europe and included Rauschenberg, Franz Klein, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and others, discovered Jansen's work after seeing it in a gallery show window that drew him and his wife Naomi in. Donson wrote about the artist's work in Jansen's first French catalog, Modern Urban Expressionism, The Art of Marcus Antonius Jansen, in which he called Jansen the innovator of modern expressionism and compared it with the Ashcan school. Jansen is picked up by MW Gallery lead by Robert Casterline from the Casterline Goodman Gallery in Aspen, and introduced to the International Fair Market in Miami during Art Basel for the first time. Jansen is invited to participate in the Tampa Museum of Art, Undercurrent, Overview 8, for the first time in a museum survey exhibition in the United States. Founder, Crosby Kemper from the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, added 2 works to its collection in 2006. These become Jansen's first works purchased for a U.S. museum. The next year, Jansen participated in the 8th International Biennale in Russia and had his work, The Swallow Symbol, placed into his first international museum, the Moscow Museum of Modern Art Permanent Collection. Jansen's second son is born, and shortly after again, was commissioned this time for a politically critical satire as part of the Warner Brothers' 70th anniversary of The Wizard of Oz. He was selected for the 12th International Print and Drawing Biennial in Taiwan with juror David Keel from the Whitney Museum of Art shortly thereafter, as one of only 9 other Americans in 2007. Jansen began painting large-scale works in the post-9/11 era and was mostly alarmed by the emerging surveillance state in 2008 and 2009 and corporate power structures through later distorted, faceless portraits. His wife, Michaela Jansen, is diagnosed and passes of cancer. Her last film footage after a 2-year battle was filmed in 2010 for a documentary titled A Painter Allegory. He addressed human concerns during this period through politics, social issues, the patenting of pig's DNA after his son's diagnosis with autism, and in 2009, his wife's diagnosis with cancer, and had a painting included in the New Britain Museum of American Art Permanent Collection. Jansen was commissioned by Absolute Vodka, becoming part of the next generation in the tradition of Absolute artists, following in the footsteps of Andy Warhol, Damien Hirst, and Keith Haring. Chief Curator at the Orange County Museum of Art, Dan Cameron, selects Creeping Obstacles in Kansas for the cover of New American Paintings Volume 94. In 2011, the same year, Jansen's wife and longtime supporter died at age 36 after a 2-year struggle with cancer, leaving Jansen with 2 sons to raise on his own. Emotionally and financially bereft, he restarted his art career from scratch after losing almost everything he had due to endless medical bills after the death of his wife. He begins painting faceless men in suits, exploring anonymity and power. He shows at the Sidney and Byrne Davis Art Center in Fort Myers immediately after his wife's passing in 2011, with a groundbreaking opening titled A Painter's Allegory, drawing thousands of visitors, being the largest attended art show at the center to date, accompanied by a short documentary, Marcus Jansen, A Painter's Allegory, produced by Fort Myers Film Festival. Founder, Eric Radatz. The Naples Museum of Art included Jansen in its annual exhibition, Florida Contemporary, in 2014. Instead of retreating, he expands, opens a large public studio space in what used to be a segregated area in Fort Myers, Florida, the residence of Robert Rauschenberg, Lichtenstein, and artist Daryl Pottorff, that permanently changed the local art scene and brought in clients from all the world and the local community together on Martin Luther King Boulevard. He began departing from 2-dimensional landscapes and moved to 3-dimensional tabletops that he calls aerial views in 2011. The aerial views added sculptural elements to painting made from unused tabletops, emerging from used mixing color palettes into 3-dimensional aerial painted landscape works. He also creates a critical series of anonymous men in suit portraits, whose faces are distorted. He continued to play with disruptive realism in his works while exploring anonymity and power in these new figures. His first, Faceless series, emerged in 2011 and was released in 2012. Street art's leading art authority and Banksy's agent, Steve Lazarides, invited Jansen to show in London at Lazarides Gallery in 2014, displaying his aerial views for the first time internationally. The show becomes a career changer for Jansen's international exposure, and Jansen is called a cartographer of conflict in his review by the London Press. Steve later also appears in Jansen's art film documentary, Examine and Report, and writes the foreword to Jansen's first monograph in 2016.
He is one of the most well-known artists in not just Southwest Florida, but all over the world. If you know the art world at all, then you know the name Marcus Jansen.
Jansen was later included in various important group exhibitions curated by Lazarides that highlight the gallery's roster of artists. Jansen is invited to show solo show with Roberta Brito in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2014. The artist attends the exhibition. In 2013, Jansen was named a winner of the Arte Laguna Biennale Prize in Venice, curated by Sabine Schaschel, director and curator of Kunsthaus Basel, Switzerland, where he was asked to stage a solo exhibition in Italy for the first time. The show was publicized by Rolling Stone, Arte, XL Republica, and Esport. Jansen had his first solo show in New York City at the Castle Fitzjohn's Gallery in the Lower East Side, organized by his longtime Brooklyn dealer, Richard Beavers. The show, Future Grounds, gains national press, art world attention, and becomes the first gallery to show his aerial views in the U.S. In 2015, Jansen diverts to critically depicting historic colonialist figures and re-examines history in more contemporary terms through his lens of distortion, and often mocking previously hailed elite figures and colonialism and the merciless capitalistic foundation it brought along on the backs of people of color at large. Jansen draws from his own personal experiences in his childhood and adolescence, trying to integrate into a European culture as the only child of color, as well as a university thesis by his father in history titled The War of Independence or the American Revolution That Was No Revolution. Another look at the reasons. Jansen takes part in a New York group exhibition curated by Terrence Smith and Noah Becker, where he shows his faceless portraits for the first time in the U.S. Sabrina Gruber, a musician and pianist, became Jansen's partner and primary photographer of the artist in his studios. Her most recognizable photos appeared in the Skira editory book, Marcus Jansen, Decade. Jansen's father and mentor, Hans Jansen, perhaps his strongest academic influence, died 4 months before Jansen's first solo museum exhibition in Europe at La Triennale di Milano Museum. The exhibition, Paintings from the Last 10 Years, dominated Italian headlines, and critics picked it as one of the top 10 shows to see in Italy, next to Basquiat, Monet, and others. Jansen was in part documented in film by Italian filmmaker Tiziano Rossi, titled Portrait in Steps. A headline in Export magazine read, "A New Star is Born," in a review by Italian art critic Igor Zanti. The exhibition is inaugurated by art historian Dr. Elmar Zorn and curated by Dr. Brooklyn McGowan and Rosella Farinati. Jansen's book, Marcus Jansen, Decade, is published by Skira Editore in Milan. The 10-year survey of works is released worldwide, includes Jansen's aerial view series being published, and the first international film is produced by Emmy-winning filmmaker and director John Schooler, who presented Jansen as the subject of the film Examine and Report, to be later shown at a world premiere at the Fort Myers Film Festival, winning the title of Best Local Film and East Hampton's Film Festival, where it wins Best Short Documentary Film. It highlights the influences that made Jansen's work what it is today, featuring art dealer Steve Lazarides, Robert Rauschenberg's art fabricator Lawrence Wojtek, art historian Dr. Brooklyn McGowan, and major Jansen collector Dieter Rampel, chairman of the Hypokunsthalle Munich, Noah Becker, founder of White Hot magazine, West Rubenstein, and others, with a cover photo taken by his wife, Sabrina Jansen. In 2017, New York-based curator Brooklyn McGowan organizes Jansen's first major survey in California at San Francisco's Weinstein Gallery, Obscure Lines Between Fact and Fiction. The show is highlighted by writer DeWitt Cheng in Artillery magazine. A first European solo museum tour was organized by art historian Elmar Zorn from Munich and began in conjunction with the Milan, Italy show at the La Triennale di Milano. It had 6 showings in Europe, proceeding to Kunst und Kultur zu Hohenachau AV, to the Kallman Museum, Ismaning, the Heitsch Gallery, Munich, the Traunstein Kirche in Traunstein, Germany, to the Zitadel Museum, Spandau, Berlin, Germany, and later to Gallery Amart, Vienna, with a final showing in May 2019. German art book publisher Hermer Verlag Munich published Jansen's first international German English language book for his German museum tour in 2017, titled Marcus Jansen Aftermath, including commentary by art critic Professor Dr. Manfred Schneckenberger, 2-time Documenta Kassel curator, who referred to Jansen as one of the most important American painters of his generation. Professor Dr. Dieter Ronte, former director of the Kunstmuseum Bonn and Vienna, art critic Gottfried Knapp from the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and art curator Dr. Elmar Zorn. Dr. Birgit Loeffler, director of Das Maximum Museum in Traunstein, Germany, introduced Jansen's work at the Traunstein Klosterkirche, where Jansen showed a series of retrospective works in its last exhibition. He was later represented by Galerie Kellermann in Dusseldorf, Germany, for 2 years. Jansen's first Germany-held exhibition in Munich, one of the homes of the German Expressionist movement in 1911, Der Blaue Reiter, formed in Munich by Wassily Kandinsky, Franz Marc, and the young Paul Klee. The exhibition consisted of 10 large works as a featured artist at the Kallman Museum Ismaning, and later a mid-career survey at the Zitadel Museum in Berlin, both becoming the first German museums to celebrate Jansen's work just before his 50th birthday. During a traveling museum exhibition for the artist organized by German curator Dr. Elmar Zorn, in collaboration with Gallery Kellerman, Dusseldorf. Robert Casterline and Jordan Goodman, owners of Casterline Goodman Gallery, showed Jansen in a solo exhibition, Now and Then, in Aspen, during the 2018 Art Crush at the Aspen Museum of Art, where noted collectors Amy and John Phelan purchased his work for their private collection. Jansen's permanent collection works were highlighted by a museum for the first time in his inaugural U.S. museum feature, Deconstructing Marcus Jansen, at the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, curated by Jade Powers. Not long after, Jansen was approached by curator Dr. Gisela Carbonell to show at the Rollins Museum of Art for his first U.S. solo exhibition in 2020 while setting up his new studio in downtown Fort Myers, a former segregated area which served as a catalyst to change the neighborhood's public image. Jansen returned to his native Bronx, New York in 2019 and opened a second studio in the Port Morris Mott Haven neighborhood right before the outbreak of COVID, while becoming part of the art community in the South Bronx. Jansen was invited to collaborate with French Street Art Authority, Magda Danish, in Paris for a solo exhibition titled Stop, Look, and Listen, and showed at his first two Asian art fairs, Art 021 in China and Taipei Dangdai in Taiwan, with Gallery Danish. Jansen officially announced the formation of the Marcus Jansen Foundation Fund to help mental illness charities and low-income children in the arts. He was commissioned by Pussycat Dolls lead singer Nicole Scherzinger in Los Angeles the same year, organized by his Florida dealer Lisa Burgess. The University of Michigan Museum of Art acquired a large Jansen painting, Hideout, 84 by 72, for its permanent collection. Jansen had his New York film premiere at the East Hampton TV Festival with Marcus Jansen Examine and Report, winning an award for Best Art TV Pilot Documentary, and was featured in an artist profile in the Epic Times and Survey at the Baker Museum in Naples, Florida, in 2021. His work, Plot Number 2, 48 by 60, was placed in the permanent collection at the Alphond Collection of Contemporary Art, Rollins Museum of Art. French art dealer Almine Rec is invited to represent Jansen globally and to present him solo in 2021 and 2022. The gallery announced the representation of the artist in December 2020. After the first two Almine Rec solo shows in Paris and in London, 6 other shows curated by Almine Rec and Richard Beaver's gallery in Brooklyn all sell out.
Thank you. Well, a work of art sold at Christie's is now helping the Bronx Museum. I actually talked to the artist behind it all, who's from the Bronx, and about the impact this is having.
It's just really about helping others and having art as a possibility. I mean, just think about it. I can create something, we can turn it into a currency and help other people. So for me, that's a big deal.
Jansen is highlighted in the New York Times for the second time in a year, while the Bronx Museum becomes the first New York City museum to acquire Jansen's work into its permanent collection. The Baker Museum includes Behind Walls No. 3 in its permanent collection after his appearance in his solo exhibition, titled Marcus Jansen, 2 Decades of Relevance. Jansen shows in his third solo gallery appearance at Almine Rec in Shanghai, titled In the Land of Silhouettes,